daughters, Joan and Ann, are here, and they'll start for us. So,
Well, it's a very good evening for us because we're very proud to honor our fathers. We'd like to thank Phyllis Monk, who has set all this up tonight and really organized everything for us. We're most appreciative of all the hard work Phyllis has done, including Phyllis' secretary, Debbie, who came to my rescue. Thank you, Debbie, who isn't even here. We're going to start by just kind of giving a brief history of Dad and his family and some of the things that he's done. And I have a cheat sheet here so that I don't forget important things that we would like to include. We also have some letters, and Phyllis has been gracious enough to say she'll help us out if Joan and I can't get through reading them, so that could happen. Pehrkon is a Latvian name. Dad's father came to this country in 1906 from a small town in Latvia near the seaport of Riga. His parents, and we have a wonderful picture of them, Fritz and Annalie Pehrkon. Fritz was a tailor, Chris was a tailor. And for the life of me, I cannot remember what her trade was, but she did have one, which was rather unusual in that time period. Grandpa was born in 1887, and he was the youngest of 4 children. He had 3 older sisters, and by the time he set sail for another country than his own, his sisters were already married and had children of their own, so he was the baby of the family by far. He left Latvia because the entire country had been taken over by the Russians, and they were conscripting for the Russian army, and Grandpa didn't want to be in the Russian army. He had been working as an apprentice blacksmith, and he felt that he had a trade. So he stowed away on a boat, working as a fireman, and he went to Germany, stayed there a while, stowed away, came to America, jumped ship, got caught, got sent back to Germany. Stayed there a few more years, came back again to America, jumped ship again, and this time was successful. He hid in a haystack in New Jersey for several days while the people from the ship tracked him down with dogs, but they did not find him. After he felt it was safe, he bought a German language newspaper because he spoke not one word of English and very little German. But he found a job as a blacksmith, and that was his trade for most of his life. When he couldn't shoe horses anymore, Grandpa sold horseshoes for the Victory Racing Peg Company. Now, Dad's other grandparents were Fred and Augusta Schultz, and they were of German extraction from Blue Island, Illinois. And that's a photo of them on their 50th wedding anniversary. And it's kind of an interesting story how Grandma and Grandpa met. Grandpa Schultz, Dad's Grandpa Schultz, was a driver for the Saring Brewery in Joliet. And we have a mug that's dated 1906 that says Gesundheit at the top. And it came from Dad's grandpa. Beer would be shipped here from Joliet, and Grandpa Schultz would keep his horses and his wagons here at the Zollers, which is approximately where Razzle Dazzle Basket Shop is now on Main Street. But to have his horses shod, he had to go down to the blacksmith, which was Grandpa Pehrkon. And Great-Grandpa Schultz decided he had 3 unmarried daughters as well as several sons back in Blue Island, so one Sunday he invited Grandpa to come to Blue Island for Sunday dinner. Grandpa met Grandma, and in 1914 they were married at First Lutheran Church in Blue Island. They traveled to Crete. Grandpa had a car, and when they got here, they had given Grandpa the keys to the bank because the bank was one of the few buildings that had a telephone. One of Grandma's brothers was a desk sergeant for the police department in Blue Island. So they opened the bank and called the desk sergeant to tell them that they had safely made the long journey from Blue Island to Crete, so that everybody knew Grandma was okay. At that time, the streetcar was not available, but later on there was a streetcar that ran between Blue Island and Crete, and it was not uncommon for 3/4 of the Schultz family to be in Crete on any given weekend. Some of the members of the audience undoubtedly remember some of the Schultz family who stayed here. Dad's Aunt Alma would come and spend summers, and his uncle Herman came to Crete quite often and became very good friends with my mother's uncle, Ollie Dunsing. And Herman Schultz and Ollie Dunsing got in all kinds of trouble together. They were quite a family mix. Grandma and Grandpa had 3 children. Their first son, Martin, died as an infant. And in 1917, Frederick August Carl Pehrkon was born. His sponsors were his grandpa Frederick and his uncle August and his aunt Clara. And I guess Grandma thought she couldn't very well name him Clara, so he became Carl. His sister Florence was born in 1919, and her name is Florence Alma Ella. She doesn't tell too many people that, however. And for purposes of further discussion tonight, you'll hear us call her Pehrkon, because most of the people in Crete remember her as Pehrkon rather than Florence. It was a name that just kind of stuck. She was good friends with Estelle Zirzo and Norma Behrens, who was Norma Piepenbrink, and Marianne Gemper, who was Marianne Renzi. They all grew up together and enjoyed living in Crete. Crete was a little bit different kind of town then than it is now. And in some of the pictures you'll notice that there still are mud sidewalks, Crete, mud roads, and wooden sidewalks. Crete didn't have a paved Main Street until 1920, and Dad was 3 years old at the time and says that he does remember when they paved Main Street. There's lots of neat pictures which after this is over you'll have to come up and look at. Pehrkon and Dad when they were little kids. Dad is a chubby little rascal. Excuse me. Other pictures, I think he liked ice cream even then. Other pictures of Pehrk and her big brother. And then there's pictures of their trip to Yellowstone Park in 1926. It was a camping trip that the whole family took. And in 1983, Dad and Aunt Pehrk made a trip back to Yellowstone. So we have both of the photos here for comparison purposes. And there was Cubby the pony. I don't know if anyone else remembers Cubby, Dad's pony. He tells, when we go shopping, like at Walt's, for instance, and the stock boy or the bag boy is putting the groceries in the bag, he'll ask the kid if he lives in Crete and then tell the kid that he used to ride his pony on the roads here when they were mud. It's interesting the responses he gets from these young guys, but he did ride the pony all over. He and the Buchanan boys, and you guys would probably know their names better than I, rode all over. And Dad used to earn enough money for an ice cream cone by giving other kids rides on Cubby for a penny. And one day he had his pockets full of pennies and was on his way for ice cream when the uncles, who later became my mother, after he met my mother, Uncle Ollie became his uncle through marriage. At that point in time, of course, he wasn't, but his Uncle Herman and my mother's Uncle Ollie decided that it would be fun to feed Cubby ginger ale and see what would happen. And so they gave the horse the ginger ale, and the horse kicked up its heels and took off, dumping Dad and all his pennies all over Main Street. And Grandma Pehrkon came out of the house and was not too happy with her brother and his friend, and took off after them with a broom in her hand. It made quite a stir, and even the local paper at the time. It's too bad we don't have a copy of that. Dad's mother's name was Louise, but most people in Crete called her Lizzie. And I think he got his love of community service from his parents, because his dad was the township constable. He was the chief of the Crete Fire Department. His mother was one of the founders of the Crete Mothers Club, which later became the Crete Women's Club. she was active in all kinds of church affairs and clubs and committees, and it was just something that he and Kurt grew up with, and that Joan and I in turn have grown up with as well. I don't know, do I? Am I missing things? We do have a letter from his sister, Pehrkon. She lives in Boise, Idaho these days, and isn't here tonight.
Actually, she wrote a poem. It says, Dear Augie, long ago and far away, Fritzy and Florence used to play. Up and down Main Street we would run, and with our friends have lots of fun. Cubby, our pony, did more than eat. We rode him around the block and down the street. He may have been old, but his temper was mild. He brought joy to many a child. In the 4th of July parade one year, Vernon Zierzo and Fritzy had no fear. They donned wedding clothes and hitched up the cart. The bride was reluctant from finish to start. In 1926, the Pehrkons left Crete for a 6-week trip, which was quite a feat. We visited many states in the West, camping each night, which was the best. Mom cooked all the meals by lantern light. We slept like logs under stars so bright. The following year, eastward we went. Ask Augie the details. My brain is now spent. My memory's exhausted, but my feelings are profound because my love and esteem for you, Augie, abound. Blessings and good things, Pehrk. And you can't really tell. This is a picture of Augie, Pehrk, Cubby, I think, in the background, a dog and a cat. So that must have been their animal collection at that time.
Yeah, he can't remember the names of the dogs or the cats. Of course, his mother always said he had more dogs than anybody she knew because they lived right on Main Street all his life, and lots of the dogs never survived Main Street. So there was a constant turnover of pets in the Pehrkon household. She also told me that she allowed him to have his rabbits under the dining room table. And I tried to use that as a ploy as a kid to get him to do the same for me, but it didn't work. He went to school at Crete Elementary. We have a photo of him in Miss Beaver's 3rd or 4th grade class. There are, I think, some of you who remember Miss Beaver. She later became Gladys Wilkening, but it's really a neat photo, and I think there are other people here in the audience in that photo besides Dad. He went to high school at a variety of places. He started out at Bloom because the year he began high school, Crete did not have a high school. From Bloom, he came back to Crete because they started a 2-year school that year. But then in his junior year, he had to choose another school, and he picked Pehrkon High School because they had a very good basketball team, and he liked to play basketball. And we have a picture of his Pehrkon basketball team and his graduation, his graduation announcement, and this is I think, so cool. For those of you who've lived around here a long time, this is a tournament that was put on by the Chicago Heights, in effect what I think became their park district, and it lists all the players for all the high schools in the area who played in that tournament, including Lou Boudreau, who played for Thornton at the time, and Everett Lorig, yes, and Dad, and others who are here, or others' brothers who are here. And the neat thing about this, and on the other side too, if we would take this out of here, there's all advertising from the town, the businesses that were in these towns at the time, and the ads are just terrific. It's really neat. In looking through his high school papers, we noticed he had a lot of excused absences for things like going to the World's Fair. Now, if we had tried that, it wouldn't have worked so well, but, you know. His first job after high school was as a dishwasher for Bessie Pease? Flossie Pease. Okay. And he didn't get paid a whole lot, but it was at Arlington Park Racetrack, so he got his room and board. He also worked for Calumet Steel and Stager Furniture for a while, and then he was drafted, like many of you, into the U.S. military service during World War II. Phyllis has brought in a wonderful paper that the Historical Society has. This is a copy of the Crete record, August 20th, 1942. with all the servicemen from Crete who were all drafted at that point in time. And Dad is pictured on this column of the paper. And there's other faces here tonight who are in this paper as well. I noticed as you were walking in the door after looking through the paper. Dad was pretty lucky in his military service. He had very tough duty on the big island of Hawaii. He was a staff sergeant in the Army, and he worked in the telephone communications, which was many, many, many feet underground during the war. And as a staff sergeant, he was the senior Army officer on the island, so he got to order the admirals from the Navy around, which is really nice for an Army sergeant to do. He was stationed a lot of different places, but mainly in the continental United States, Brooksville, Florida, and Spokane, Washington, Salt Lake City, Utah, a few other places. And we have some neat pictures here of him in his uniform. Of my mom, she's got to go with him to a lot of places by that time, and his discharge papers. And then we kept going through, there were certain things we found that just didn't go with anything, so we stuck them wherever we thought they would work best. This is a picture of my mother and her mother and Aunt Perk and Grandma Pehrkon in 1942. And this is a picture of Grandpa Dunsing and Norman and my dad and his dad in 1959. And it's just kind of a cool thing to look at. Speaking of my mother, they grew up in the same town, always kind of knew each other. But in high school, he dated the banker's daughter from Pehrkon. And so my mother always teased him that, he came down a little bit when he started dating her and marrying her. They were married in 1942 in November. This photo is actually taken on their wedding day. This one was taken a few weeks, or a few days, I should say, I guess, before the wedding. And they were living in the Dearson house on Main Street, which is now a dentist's office, a big red brick house with a tower. And their wedding photos were taken outside of the tower house. And when Joan and Larry got married a couple of years ago, they stopped and had their picture taken. The Levines were living there at the time and gave them permission to go and have their pictures taken outside too. So we have both sets of those photos, which are really nice. My folks left Crete right after the wedding and went to Spokane, which they both said was God's country, and they many times said they would like to go back for a visit, but never got back there for some reason or another. And the faces in some of these photos I can't identify, and Dad at least says he can't identify. I don't know, maybe he's just not looking so clearly at them. My parents were married for I don't know how many years. I know it's more than 25, 30, we have, let's see, yeah, there's a whole group of photos here through the years, including photos of Joan and me, my baptism back in 1946, and hers in 1959. There were two boys who were born between us who both died. They didn't live but a few hours. We have pictures of each of us as kids, and it was hard for me. People say we don't look at all alike usually, but it was hard for me going through some of the pictures to tell who was who, but that wasn't hard after we looked at the black and white and the colored. We also have some photos of the rest of the family. My dad just had one sister, my mother one brother, Norman Dunsing. Some of you know Norman, some of you went to school with Norman. And we have a couple cool photos here of Norman as a little kid. And then another one, there it is, of Norman and my dad, a more current photo. Norman had borrowed his son-in-law's truck. And this is a really cool photo. Speaking of Norman, we also have a communication from him. He's living in California these days.
Okay, this is Augie, the brother I never had. Although I never had a real brother, I can't remember life without Augie, my brother-in-law for over 50 years. I can recall when he was in the Army in the 40s, getting letters from him addressed to Master Norman Dunsing. I always thought that was kind of cool. Remember V-mail. I have no idea what that means. After the war, when he returned home, I always looked upon him as big brother as well as a role model. He has always been the strong, silent type. His steady, easygoing manner and good judgment was also noticed by people outside the family, as was evidenced by his prominence in AMVETS and local politics. I can remember living with Augie and Dorothy while Mom and Dad were living in Elgin. They always welcomed me, but as he told Harry Roush, I'd rather buy his clothes than feed him. Lucky for him at that time, Uncle Sam was buying my clothes and feeding me too. I guess we weren't really brothers though, because brothers fight. I can only remember one fight in over 50 years, and that was just a heated argument. If you must have a brother-in-law, and most of us do, you'll never have a better one than Frederick August Carl Pehrkon. Best wishes on your special day, Love, Junior.
He's still known as Junior, and he never was a junior. So, we don't know quite how that happened, but nicknames kind of abound in Crete. Even with some of you sitting here in the audience, I know you by one name and Dad calls you by something else because it was the nickname from childhood. The Augie became more prevalent when he was in high school playing basketball, when he worked at Steger Furniture when I was a kid. For a long time he was at Steger Furniture. He was known as Perk, which is what his sister's known as here in Crete, so it gets kind of confusing sometimes. In fact, one time he was standing in the pharmacy in Crete waiting for a prescription, and the first person who came up to him called him Fred because it was someone he was currently on the town board with. And the next person to come up was Irma, and she talked to him and called him Augie. And then the next person to come up was Harry Vogt, and he called him Fritzy. And finally the woman behind the counter at the pharmacy said, "Excuse me, can I ask you, just what is your name?" I told her he answers to all kinds of names, which is obviously true. Talking about Steger Furniture, he started out, when he got back from service, he didn't want to work shift work, and had he gone back to Calumet Steel, he would have had to work various shifts. So he went to work for Steger Furniture. I think on the line in the beginning, and then when I was a kid, it was mailroom foreman, and he eventually became plant superintendent of the entire factory. In fact, he was the last man to turn the key in the door before they tore the building down. He was the last employee that Steger Furniture had. In the top photo, he's in amongst a lot of other people, a few who still live in the area that we see once in a while. That is the mailroom foreman days. And the bottom photo here is when he was plant superintendent with purchasing agent Bob Bach from Steger and plant manager Rudy Forrester, who was an outlander that they brought in from Indiana for a while. But Rudy was a real cool guy. I had a lot of fun with him. Community service. Golly, we have a lot of that. Like many, many people, after he came back from the war, the veterans in the Crete area decided to form the Crete AMVET post-84, and they decided to build a building to honor those servicemen who didn't make it back from the war. And I can't really give you the list of those names, but if you walk by the AMVET building, the names are posted on the front of the building. The guys did all the work themselves. Ralph Baker, Dad, Harry Roush, Jimmy Adams. I see more of you in the audience too. There were carpenters, there were bricklayers, there were plumbers, there were electricians, many of them trades that they had learned in the services. They built the building by themselves, and all of us kids grew up playing in the mud before the floor was laid, on the roof when they were putting tar paper down. We just had a grand old time. There were lots of great fundraising kinds of things, lots of community service things, lots of district meetings in all kinds of places. Rantoul, I remember, Danville, I remember, a lot of other places as well. The AMVETS and auxiliary became a very important part of my parents' lives. The day the building was dedicated, Dad had written to Senator Everett Dirksen and begged him to come for the dedication, and he did. Crete was honored. They flew him in by helicopter, and he landed in the field across from our house on Exchange Street. And then Dad took him down to the building, so we have photos of that dedication day. And I can't honestly tell you what the date was. Maybe some of you remember. I'm guessing 1955. 53. I can't remember exactly. And the records about it are in one of the Historical Society cabinets, but I didn't get there to get those out, so that's kind of an open-ended thing. My mother was president of the AMVETS Auxiliary, I think in about 52, 53, and Dad was commander in 50 and 51. Didn't he look young? Besides the AMVETS, he had a lot of affiliation with the Crete Township Fire Department. The fire department asked him to come on the fire board to replace Willard Wassman. And that was in about 1967, I believe, and he continued to serve on the fire board for the next 13 years, many of those years as president. They did all kinds of innovative things in those days, a lot of things that the fire department today, it wouldn't be what it is without it, including the purchase of the land and the construction of the building for Firehouse Number 2 on the corner of Cleming and Exchange Street. Dad was the person who negotiated with the lady whose name I don't remember, but he talked her into selling her funny little odd pie-shaped lot to the fire department for a rather low sum of money. He also talked Mrs. Dearson into selling the land for the AMVET building. He and Pete Barrett went to see her. Of course, it probably didn't hurt that she was my mother's great aunt, but it had been her husband's blacksmith shop, and she sold them the land for the AMVET building for $500, which was a pretty good deal, even in those days. Dad has been the parade marshal in Crete. They honored him in what year? 1990. The village of Crete gave a proclamation honoring all veterans at the Memorial Day Parade, and we have that up here. When Crete celebrated its sesquicentennial in 1986, Dad was honored to portray Willard Wood in the skit that was presented at that time, and Winnie Easterday portrayed Diantha. It wasn't Saber Betty at that time, although she has portrayed Diantha for us for other historical society functions. We celebrated Dad's 75th birthday in 1992 with an open house at the AMVET building. Lots of people came, and we just had a really good time. And it was nice to see a lot of family and friends. Among the people who were there that day were my cousins, and we have some letters from my cousins. This is from Pehrk's girls.
To Uncle Augie. Throughout the years of holiday and summer visits to Goodnoe Gulch, we always remember our uncle with fondness and good times. In the summer, we remember you straight and tall as part of the American veterans in the 4th of July parade. We remember your good nature and cheer in getting the pool ready for your daughters, nieces, and neighborhood friends. We remember you running outside with the dogs, your red plaid coat braced against the nippy November air. We remember you sitting at the head of the table during Thanksgiving feast while Aunt Alma said grace in German. We remember you and Aunt Dorothy taking the time to drive your pre-16-year-old daughter and nieces to downtown Chicago so we could see our musical idol, Billy Joel, live in concert. There's more to the story than this. They came every year for Thanksgiving, like on Wednesday night, and they would stay the whole weekend. And we were obsessed with Billy Joel at that time, and I got tickets. Well, the concert was Saturday night, and the day of the concert, we got a terrible blizzard. And all day long, they kept saying, "This is the worst snow we've had from '67. You know, stay home." And actually, I didn't have my license, but Mary did, my cousin, and the plan was she was supposed to drive us downtown. Well, my mother and her mother, Aunt Pehrk, had a fit. You know, you guys aren't going, blah, blah, blah. So Dad rescued us, And he said, you know, you're not going to let those girls not go to that concert. I'll drive. Get ready. We're leaving in 10 minutes. So my mother got ready, and he drove us downtown to this concert at the Auditorium Theater. And the weather was so bad, and cars were just, you know, sliding off into the ditch, you know, left and right. But we made it fine, and by the time we got home, it was better. But I had forgotten that, but until, you know, they said this. But that was a very, very kind thing of him to do. They mentioned Stager Furniture and going there, and I had forgotten that too because I went with him on Saturdays. But BJ remembers going there in the freight elevator and all that, and I was really surprised. But they continue. Most of all, we remember you for your kindness and in knowing that family and country always come first. God bless you, Uncle Augie, and congratulations on this most worthy honor. Love, your nieces, BJ and Mary.
And we have a letter from Norman's daughter, Dawn, who lives on Maui in Hawaii.
Yeah, oceanfront not front property, but a view of the ocean, right on the golf course, rough life. Okay, my recollections of Uncle Augie are favorite uncle. My earliest memory of Uncle Augie is the nickname I had for him, Augie Doggie. While other kids had to be satisfied with watching Augie Doggie on TV, I had my very own Uncle Augie Doggie. I remember the joy Uncle Augie and Aunt Dorothy had when my brother Doug was born. There was finally a little boy to all those girl cousins. Both Uncle Augie and Aunt Dorothy spoiled Doug a lot. I always thought they gave him the neatest gifts at Christmas and birthdays. I don't think that Ann, Joan, Mary, BJ, Debbie, or myself ever came close to being the big thrill that Doug was when he was born. This is true. I remember the big excitement when going to the Pehrkons, and Doug and Deb rode with Uncle Augie on his riding mower. We never had one of those. And there's a picture somewhere. This was, well, there's no kids here. This is what children did before Sony PlayStation. This is my dad and Mary and BJ, and in the back is myself and Kieran, who's sitting in the second row, who is my best friend from childhood. And this, my father had the patience of a saint. He should write a book on parenting. When all the other parents were like screaming, "Get out of here," he would put us in there and ride us around and around and around. And we thought that was like the best thing in the world. Okay. Uncle Augie once told me he was the chief baker for Oreo cookies. Can't see an Oreo without thinking of him. My most recent memorable moment with Uncle Augie came a few years ago when we were visiting Beecher. Sunday morning came and we hopped in the car to drive to church. Mark, that's Don's husband, asked Uncle Augie why he was driving down the middle of 2 lanes of highway. Uncle Augie replied, "Why not? I paid for both. I'll use both." Mark thought that was really cool and has insisted on his constitutional right to use both lanes of the road ever since. For those of you unfamiliar with Maui, we have very few double lanes in the same direction roads, so driving down the middle can be a bit dangerous, especially on the motorcycle. Congratulations on your honor at the Crete Historical Society, Uncle Augie. Love, Don and Mark.
She talked a lot about her brother Doug, and Doug got married this summer. And we were sitting at the wedding, and Doug is telling Uncle Augie stories to the whole group that was hanging around. And as we walked into the reception area, his friends would come up to Dad and say, "So you're the famous Uncle Augie." It's like Doug has spread his fame. We also have a photo here, which I mentioned earlier, of Joan and Larry's wedding in 1994. It was a happy occasion to get the whole family together and lots of friends as well. We had...
it was hot, right?
A little bit.
The video man on this side is Joan's brother-in-law, Tim Peterkon.
He was our best man, and I'm standing up there, and it was like, I don't know, 100 and some degrees in the church. And I'm looking at the minister and the perspiration. I'm watching it go like this, and it would split and go down either way. And then I'm looking at Larry, and it's going down here and dripping off his chin. And then I'm looking over at Tim, and it's pouring down, and I'm thinking, okay, which one of them is going to go down first? They all made it with flying colors.
The video man on this side is Joan's husband, Larry Weigel, for those of you who don't know Larry. The wedding was also very nice because the girls who stood up in the wedding for Joan were literally her friends from forever. Karen, take a bow. Karen, take a bow. Karen, well, first of all, Sheila was there. She was not in the wedding, but Sheila was Joan's friend when she was only 2. They were inseparable for a couple of years. Then we moved, and Karen became the next inseparable friend. They're still hanging out together after all these years. Joan's friend Laura, that she had met in high school. Her friend Karen, that she met in 2nd grade. And her cousin Mary, little Mary, who wrote such a nice letter. The other thing that was neat then, and is neat tonight too, is that our neighbors are here. I mean, neighbors from a long time ago, and current neighbors, and that's really nice. It's your turn to say something now.
Well, Ralph and Adeline. Now, Ralph and Adeline were way before I made it into the world, so. But all the stories I hear, Anne actually grew up in Crete on Exchange Street, but I grew up south of Crete. But yeah, Ralph and Adeline Baker. Go ahead.
And you can't believe all the trouble I had with them living upstairs from me.
I
All the
believe it.
noise.
I heard she was a real brat.
And my daughter had to learn her how to ride a bicycle too.
Oh, yes, and he has the video to prove it, too. They had their movies when we were kids put on video, so now the whole world can see. Yes.
And Karen and her brothers taught me how to ride a bicycle, and I was scared to death. And so finally they tricked me and said, "Here, get on my bike." And I said, "Okay," and it had no training wheels, and they shoved me down the hill, and there I was.
It was a steep hill, too.
So that's how I learned. Blanche Pekulski and her daughter Karen, they were my neighbors growing up in Goodnow. And then the Gribbons, who are in the back row, moved in when I was 10, 11, I don't know. George was, what, like 3 years old? I don't know how they put up with me because I was over there all the time, underfoot. And their son is here, who I used to babysit.
And who's my current neighbor.
And Cindy Kriegscheld, which you went to school more
Yeah.
with her.
Cindy and I have known each other a very long time. I went to Trinity, and she went to Zion, and we lived across the street from each other for many, many years now. And then our neighbor Mary, another Mary.
Yes.
We have a lot of Marys on our
Mary.
street.
There's actually another Mary who isn't here
Yes.
because she has a knee problem right now.
But our neighbor Mary Arnold lives directly across the street from us. She's also sitting in the back row back there, and she's a very good neighbor. She's the kind who helps you out when you need help, whenever that may be. There's also another story about we're talking about Adeline and Ralph in the upstairs apartment. Grandma and Grandpa Dunsink got this dog, and this dog had 2 puppies, and of course I fell in love with one of the puppies. So for my birthday, I got the puppy, and we never asked Adeline and Ralph if that would be okay. But the puppy came to live at 392 Exchange Street anyhow, and Ralph was really taken by the dog. He liked him a lot. Adeline wasn't quite as fond of Snoozy, but Snoozy loved Adeline. And he kind of became the household dog because Ronnie and Bonnie living downstairs and me upstairs, we shared him. He was everybody's dog. And Ralph's mom lived in the house behind us, and he would take a trip over to Mary's to get a bone, and then she'd put it in a little bag for him, and then he'd carry it back to our house and go upstairs with his bone. So he was kind of the neighborhood pooch. But the half of my life I didn't spend in my own house, I spent at Adeline's. And the half of Joan's life that she didn't spend at our house, she spent at Blanche's. So it's like our 2 second mothers are here tonight, which is really neat. Okay, what have we forgotten?
I don't know, Dad, what did you forget? Oh, I know, I have a story. I don't know, is anybody here who knew him when he lived on Main Street? I don't know if you know this story. He always used to tell me that Liddy Winter was a piano teacher, and every Halloween he would take her gate off and he'd climb up the pole and he'd hang it on top of the pole, and then the next morning he'd go over there and he'd say, "Oh, Miss Winter, some poor little boy put your gate up on the top of the pole." And she'd say, "Oh, Fritz, could you get it down for me?" "Sure." So he would, and then she'd give him money.
But again, if one of us had tried that, talking about Stager Furniture. No, Gib wasn't in the room when we were talking about Stager. Gib and Dad used to work together at Stager Furniture a long time ago. I grew up about Gib's kids in his wonderful household, and it's just great to have him here tonight. Any good stories from Stager Furniture, Gib? At least not that he wants to tell. We brought along a few things, a couple of Dad's yearbooks from Pehrkon High School, his Orphan Annie mug, which maybe many of you had at one point in time. I think he sent away for them, for buying Ovaltine. And his bank from when he was a little boy, the little dog. We also brought a newspaper clipping. One of the other civic things that he did was act as a volunteer in the school system. He and Ann Bosser used to work at Crete Elementary 2 days a week for quite a long time. And we have the clipping for that. And then we have a photo here of Wendell Regnier. Many of you remember Wendell. And that's another thing that Dad has done that he hasn't gotten quite as much public credit for, and that is helping to care for a whole list of people. Vic Barons, and Phyllis, who else? I gave you
Yeah,
John
Wendell
Lazarus.
Reagan, John Lazarus, I have little cheap sheets. Piepenbrink, John Munn, Eric Muser, I know of too,
Yeah,
besides
a
Wendell.
lot of people. It's something someone doesn't necessarily like to do, staying with someone who needs help, but Dad seemed to manage to cheer them up quite a bit too. In fact, Eddie used to tell the story that John would just sit. I don't know how many of you remember John and Etta Lazarus. John was a very young man and went in for a very minor surgery and had a bad reaction to the anesthetic, among other things, and ended up just not very functional. And many times would just sit in a chair. But when Dad would stay with him, they lived out on a farm on Bemis Road at that time, and Dad would get him to walk the whole perimeter of the yard and back into the house, and Etta said he was the only one who could manage to do that. Okay, this is the time when we need some of you in the audience to speak up, and so Joan and I are going to go sit down and let the rest of you do some
Actually, we thought you two could sit up here and Fred could come up and join you, so
Oh,
you
all
can
right.
face everyone and
Okay.
say some things, and it'd be great. So you, the three of you don't have to turn around, and you took my, what I was gonna say, because I am aware that Fred has spent many, many hours, and many people don't know this, helping people who are handicapped, who can't do things themselves, taking them to the doctors, helped them in and out of cars, stayed with them, and that's his non-public self. He's done many, many things throughout his life, and people don't know about that at all. So he deserves a lot of praise for that. In addition to all the other things, of course, that he's done too. I had the privilege of living next door to him for 3 months too, while my house was being built. And my two sons, and we lived in what was called, we named it Moosehead Lodge. There was this terrific moose that covered half the wall, and where my sons had the bedroom. They loved to hang their clothes, clean or dirty, on the antlers. But I was told that, I'm not sure if it's true, that it was your father-in-law who killed that moose during World War II, and it provided meat for the family for quite a long time during World War II. But we just loved living there in Moosehead Lodge, and had a great fun, and Augie helped us out by connecting our washer dryer for us, and just coming over and helping us do a few things while we lived there. So this is your opportunity to stand up, and so the Historical Society and others can record it too, because I know he's done a lot more things. So please, one at a time, just go ahead and stand up.
Come on, somebody has to be brave and be the first.
Yeah, Virginia.
I remember many, many Saturday nights when Augie and Dorothy and Elmer and I would go bowling. And then we had over in Homewood, and we paid, I think, 15 cents a line. And then we would stop at Carlo's, and we'd have spaghetti for a quarter a plate. Oh, it was the best spaghetti too.
Anyone else? There's some people here from the township, and Augie served many, many years as trustee and been to quite a few meetings.
I can comment on the fact that I've worked with Augie, at least in my period of public life, which began in 1985, and his service has always been timeless, and his wisdom the same. He and his interest has grown as our needs have grown. We all know him as the beacon and the keeper of the landfill, which many years ago was not something that anybody even was quite concerned about. And he was able to learn everything that he needed to do. He was very instrumental in starting the organization Crete, which brought many people together. And I think prevented that landfill out there from Beecher Sex by Beacon from expanding. And I think that plus many of the other timeless things he does with our seniors, even though he doesn't consider himself necessarily one, though they do vary quite a bit. I'm very proud to have known you. I've learned and grown by being a part. You're being a part of my life, and I thank you, and the township certainly is indebted to your service.
Okay. Last night I jotted down a few things, so I need a crib sheet like Ann did.
Where would we be without them?
First of all, I'd like to congratulate you, Augie, for service you've done to the community. You're in a select group of people that were recognized by the Historical Society. Hans Clausen, Vern Crackle, education. Hans Clausen was police chief for many, many years. Charlie Seehausen Grocery for many, many years. Great beat ring, great historian, Wotan family, all great people. One of my earliest recollections of Pehrkon family, I lived on the west side. My mother invariably, almost every day, would take me to Grandma Wilkening's, which is located on Main Street, about midway between Division and Vermont Street. She'd pull me in a wagon sometimes we'd walk, sometimes we'd ride a bike. But invariably we'd go by Pehrkon Garage. Little kid, seeing this great big red fire truck sitting in the corner. Every day I went by, it's, little kids are fascinated with it. I can remember great big headlamps on the things like that. When there was Augie's dad was fire chief at that time, and the fire truck was housed in the garage there. And when there was a fire, they blew the fire siren in Crete. I lived away on the west side. In summertime, you didn't need a fire siren. You could hear this Garford truck starting up in the garage. You could hear it way over on the west side. Jimmy Adams would probably verify what I'm saying. You didn't need a siren. You could hear that truck going down the road. And Mr. Pehrkon was a blacksmith, as Anna alluded to, and he served a lot of the racetracks around here with his horseshoeing experience. He did Lincoln Fields, Washington Park, which was Alamora was Lincoln Field, Washington Park Racetrack, which is no longer there, Hawthorne, Sportsman's Park, Arlington, where Augie did some restaurant work for Mrs. Pease up there, I understand. Talked to Charlie Seehausen the other night and said, what are your recollections of the Pehrkon family? He said, well, a number of years back, I was down in Florida, I went to the Hialeah racetrack, walking around, and here's Augie's dad sitting on a bench out there in Hialeah, Florida. What else have I got? Oh, talked to my sister. My sister is in a nursing home in South Texas, been there for a few years. And I said, what is your recollection of Pehrkon family? She said, well, my parents, when they were first married, lived in the house just at the south side of the Pehrkon garage. And my sister was born in that house. Talking to Bob Buchanan a couple of weeks ago, I said, what is your recollection of the Pehrkon family? and he said that your folks lived in the house next to my grandma and grandpa Wilkening, just between my grandparents' house and the Buchanan house, the old Folsom house. And that's where they lived, I guess, before they had the house farther up there. One thing I remember on a Saturday night, I think it was, must have been 1927 or something like that, there were 3 fires in Crete. And one of them was the elevator building, which is just north of where the lumber yard is now. And shortly after that, there was a fire at Zoller's barn, which was by the railroad track, just a block west of where the post office is now. And then there was another one, I don't know just where that took place, Augie, if you recall, was a barn or something that burned also. But your dad found this fella that was an itinerant guy, and he lit all these fires. And your dad was able to apprehend him, is that not right?
That's right.
I don't know, someone said he had some straw on him or something like that, but they didn't get him. One of the things I've done, I've collected nicknames for kids in Crete. And it wasn't just the kids. When Augie's dad was fire chief, I had a list of a few guys that were firemen at that time. Schlemmer family, Schlitz, Slats, and Pee Wee. And their dad also was a fireman, if I remember correctly, and as a little kid I can remember him. I don't think he had a full hand of fingers. He had worked in like a shop where Gib worked, working with wood, and he lost almost all of his fingers. Hobo Williamson was a fireman. Croc Kale, Cookie Fry, and my uncle Al Wilkening, who married Gladys Beaver, which was alluded to before, who was a teacher at the Crete grade school at that time. My uncle Al Wilkening's nickname was Nigger. He worked on Uncle Johnny's store, yeah. But he was very well known throughout the South suburban area, and even in the city. He was what we today would probably call a semi-professional basketball player. Later on, he refereed basketball games around. Augie probably remembers Uncle Al running up and down the court in his black and white striped shirt. We also had one other called, quote, nigger in town, Nigger Lorenzo. A few years younger than I. So, I'm skinny. I'm Skinny Laurie. Ritzy, that's, when I grew up, that's we call Augie now, it was always Fritzy. Some of the contemporary nicknames of that time, Mushy Lizdero. Dad ran a tavern on Main Street. Slits Buchanan, Go Belly Allen. Grover Allen. I suppose Jimmy Adams is coming up with a lot of new names that I haven't got. The Meering brothers. Milford Meering was known as Butch and Concrete. When things didn't go right, when Mr. Crackle also had the high school basketball team, and Butch's name was Milford, and when things didn't go right on basketball, he would call him Milford. That would get his attention. Also, Kenny Marion's name was Hanky. Bussy Weeks is on one of the pictures of Augie played basketball weeks. Picture in the Crete historical book of Augie and Piffle Huffman, Melville Huffman. And when I talked to Bob Buchanan, I mentioned to him, I said, there's a picture in the historical book of Augie and Fritzy with his pony with Piffle Huffman and Vernon Zerza. He said, well, you know where they got that pony? And I said, I have no idea. I said, I know they had one. They bought it from, I just talked to Augie before, they bought it from my Uncle Fred Wilkening, who lives in the house where the funeral home is at the north end of town. That was my great uncle Fred. They had 4 or 5 boys, and I suppose they had a pony and no longer needed it, and they bought it from Uncle Fred, and Augie verified that part. We played basketball, Augie. You guys watch basketball now. Ralph played at that time. Center jump. After you scored a basket, the ball was dead, you brought it back to the center of the floor. Referee tossed it up again, and you got a center jump after every basket. Didn't have a 10-second line at that time. That came in later on. Halloween's coming up. One of the things I remember, and one of you probably, maybe you had a hand in it, I don't know. But Mr. Fred Zoller was in the hauling business. He had great big wagons, wooden wagons with oak, must have been about 3 inches thick on it, wheels that high, big white, heavy steel rims on them. Somehow they took one of those wagons from the barn that burned over there at one time, took it over here to right behind where this building is now. There was a frame building there, like a big barn. They got this wagon up on top of that thing, must have been 30 feet up in the air, and pitch broke like that. I was going to Trinity School at the time. They came to school that morning, and everybody, where's this wagon up on top? How they ever got it up on that roof. But the same night at the public school, they got a bicycle, and they attached it onto the flagpole and hoisted it up. Now I'm going to tell something. I didn't have it on my, okay. Some of your relation, and Spotlight Duns it.
Grandpa's youngest brother.
Yeah, there you are. A lot of the houses in Crete didn't have indoor plumbing. So they had this little building in the back, some were single-seaters and some were 2-seaters or more. And there was a place on the west side, I'm not going to mention where it was, but these guys from downtown here went over to the west side Halloweening, and they pushed this thing over. Somehow Spotlight lost his footing.
Just for purposes of identification here, Spotlight and the aforementioned Uncle Ollie Dunsing were brothers. Something with those Dunsing
They
brothers.
lived right on the border over there. Okay, Mrs. Pehrkon, known for her angel food cakes.
Oh, yeah.
And I talked to Ann one time, she said, well, she also made the chocolate angel food cakes. But anytime I and Olga had anything going on, entertainment of any kind, Mrs. Pehrkon's cake was the feature thing on the table at that time. Okay. And you made the Schultz family in Blue Island, and Augie has told me one time, he says, I can eat India, I can eat all kinds of fat, and I don't have any cholesterol problems. I get it from my grandpa Schultz in Blue Island, he could eat fat just like everything. It's true?
The story goes he used to spread goose grease on a slice of homemade bread and eat it. But he lived to be 87 without a sick day in his life. So.
You mentioned Gladys Beaver. She later married my Uncle Al. They courted for years and years and years and nobody. But the teachers couldn't get married and keep a job.
Really?
Yeah. So later on, they were married. She later became my aunt. Pinochle games at the Pehrkon house. Tell me they were something else.
Every
Tell me your
Saturday
dad
night.
would not let anybody get a bid. Whether he had the cards or not.
Especially when he was playing Ralph's Mother Mary.
I grew up with Perky, Augie's sister. She's a classmate of mine. Sweetest gal you ever went with. Ralph will verify that, I'm sure. there's a few contemporary nicknames for gals at that time. Pehrkon was the one, and you mentioned Estelle Zierzo. Her nickname was Easy, because that was her initials. Shrimp Mel, Lawrence Helm, Shrimp Mel, Bitsy Patel, and Tootsie Tat, who had a brother named Toots. I don't know if you have any recollection of the last night I sat there and when the Cretes celebrated their sesquicentennial. This young man made signs that went up throughout all the village for the street signs. It's taken them a long, long time to do. Another thing Marge, my wife Marge, reminded me of, a number of years ago you made a creche for Trinity Church, and they used that for a number of years.
And he's making a new one for this year.
All right. Incidentally, I'm going to close. Trinity congregation next year will be celebrating their 150th anniversary. And we're looking forward to do some celebrating of that.
Thank you, Everett.
Okay.
Is there anyone else that we're just having, for some who just walked in, we're inviting anyone to say anything
Some who
anything
just
about?
walked in, right?
Yeah. Right.
Be specific. My son was going to be here a little earlier. We did have a call, so we're just running just a few minutes late here. The representative from the Crete Township Fire Department. This is a rated R resolution recognizing the service of Fred Pehrkon. Whereas Fred Pehrkon served as a trustee of the Crete Township Fire Protection District for 13 years from 1967 to 1980. Whereas the Board of Trustees, being mindful of the long and faithful service rendered to Crete Township Fire Protection District by the said Fred Pehrkon, and whereas the Board of Trustees, speaking for themselves and for all of the people of the fire district at large, wish to recognize his distinguished and dedicated service. Be it resolved by the Board of Trustees of Crete Township Fire Protection District as follows. Resolved that this resolution is adopted for the purpose of recognizing the services of Fred Pehrkon, Crete Township Fire Protection District trustee, who served his community faithfully for 13 years. Be it further resolved that this resolution be permanently spread upon the official records of the Crete Township Fire Protection District. Recognized this 22nd day of October, 1998. Rich Mose, Dick Partner, and Tim Miller, and our current trustees.
Thank you.
I should have said I'm Ben Spelly. I'm currently on the department, and I think you probably left about the time I was joining. So
I think you were one of the trainees his last year.
it could have been, yeah. So, and if any of you want to join, applications. You don't have to, if you, obviously, you can, the calls only come in at about 6:30, so it's not a problem. So we appreciate your service. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else? Paula?
We came in 1953, and my husband always considered Augie as a true blue person, was always dependable and the greatest person. Worked with him on various things.
Paula's husband just recently passed away, and one of the last times we went to see him was this past Christmas to deliver a Christmas gift from the Crete AMVETS. Dad's still active in AMVETS. He's the service officer currently, and so we do go to those who are homebound at Christmas time. And we went to see Don Hayes in the nursing home this past Christmas and got stuck in the elevator at the nursing home. And And we had like 3 or 4 people from the nursing home staff with us in the elevator, and they tried to get it going, and they couldn't, so finally they forced the door open. We're between floors, and they lowered a folding chair like this down into the elevator and told us to stand on it and climb out. And all of the rest of us were a little younger than he, and we all had trouble, but he just chinned himself kind of and hoisted himself up and shot right out and over. But that was our exploit as ambit service officer this past Christmas. He's also, one thing we didn't cover much tonight was the Historical Society itself. When the society was formed, somehow or other, I got elected president, and I held that office for a heck of a long time. And like with all things I get involved with, my family gets involved too. Just ask my sister and my brother-in-law and my father. There were many cold days sitting at Goodnoe Grove with Nellie and Dottie and Ella Moeller for Earth Day in the spring. Lugging stuff, moving stuff. When all the history books were delivered, who unloaded all 600 cartons of books? He did. The list for Historical Society things is endless because, like I said, I was just involved for a long time, and that, whether he wanted to or not, involved him as well.
And I'd like to add that we have Augie to thank for doing the numbers in front of people's homes. It gives a date in which their homes were built. And so as you go around town, there are a lot of old homes that have the date, the year, and Augie did those as a service for the Historical Society, and also people donated funds for Augie's work. So that's another thank you very much.
Is there anyone else who has something to share?
I do.
You do.
Well, when
Our former neighbor Blanche Pehrkon.
Well, when I lived in Chicago, and when I got married, I came out here, and then I met Dorothy Pehrkon. I didn't know anybody out here. We bought a house out here. And then I got to know these people. Oh my God, we had a ball. I always considered Dorothy my dearest friend, and Fred. But these 2 girls, they're my second daughters. Nobody likes them 2, but Karen over here, and plus my 2 boys, they used to have a ball come into my house, and she'd go over there, and they're the most wonderful people I ever know.
We really enjoyed living next door.
Yeah, I have to say something. Blanche is the most wonderful woman in the whole world. And well, all of you who knew my mother, you knew, explosion, okay? And I was always in trouble. And I remember one day I left the house, and I think it was when the pool, the pool was here or whatever. But she's like, now, don't, whatever you do, don't go by that pool and don't get wet. Well, the next thing, I was in the pool, and I was terrified, and I remember I was crying, and I thought, oh, my mother's going to kill me. And Blanche said, oh, honey, don't worry, we'll fix it. And so I came in and probably put on some of Karen's clothes, and she put my clothes in the dryer. Went home, my mom never knew. So, Blanche is like my second mother.
I am.
And I appreciate
2
that.
girls are my daughters.
You're the sisters
Second
I
daughter,
never
yeah.
had. Blanche and Karen came out and spent the day with us today, and we just had the best time reminiscing. And it's like, even though we don't see each other that often anymore, it's like you just pick up where you left off. And that's what real, friendship is, obviously. Our mother didn't drive until after Joan was born.
Are you sure they're not your daughters?
Only from Ralph.
Nothing has changed in all these years. My mother didn't drive until after Joan was born. So when I was a kid, mothers who drove were like, wow. I thought they were really something. And Adeline, of course, drove. And Ralph's mother, Mary, drove. And Adeline and Ralph were involved in as many things as my folks were. And they went here and did this and that, and they were both involved in the church, and they were both involved with AMVETS, and they just were busy. But Mary always had time for us, Ralph's mother. And she would take Bonnie and I all kinds of places. And to have a grandma who drove was really an experience. And Mary, one time came over and was driving a truck, and Dad said something to her about women driving trucks. And Mary proceeded to exactly explain to him why it was perfectly acceptable for women to drive trucks.
Virginia? And I remember your mother called me one day and said, I want to start driving. Will you ride with me? So a number of days, without Elmer or Augie knowing it, she and I went out. In the first snowstorm, I was scared to death. I wouldn't get in the car. Dorothy came driving down the street, and from that time on, she drove.
We used to tease her that we were going to bury her with her car keys in her hand because she could never make it in the next world without those car keys. She spent a lot of time on the road for someone who didn't used to drive, kind of thing.
My earliest memories were of in the car in that Dodge with the
Green Dodge.
No, not the green Dodge.
Blue, the blue car.
No, before the blue car. Before the Chrysler Newport, there was a pink Dodge.
There was the Dodge that the Ambets won, some kind of a promotion, and that Dad bought from the Ambets. It was a push-button Dodge, 1958. That car.
And we'd be driving to Crete, and she'd say, okay, I'm late, so watch for cops.
Do you remember that, Karen?
And to illustrate what a great father my father is, when I was, I guess I was 16 right before I turned 17, I had gotten my license, but I had it through the summer. It was the first really snowy day that we had. So I'm leaving for school, and as I walk out the door, he says, now it's going to be slick out there, so be careful. So typical 16-year-old Joan goes, well, I've had my license for 6 months, don't you think I know how to drive? And I went out the door, got in the car, pulled out of our driveway, pulled in the neighbor's driveway to pick her up from school, not Karen, another girl, Pat. Backed out of her driveway, stepped on the gas, went down the hill, lost control of the car, spun around and around like the Wizard of Oz, and crashed into a phone pole. And so then I had to go back to the house, and then the school bus went by. So that was my last chance to get a ride to school, so then we had to go back in and tell him, and he never blew up, never. Of course, nothing he could have done to me equaled the ridicule I received at school from my classmates after they saw me doing the car. But then shortly after that, I had tickets to a concert downtown, and he said to my mother, I think she should take the good car, just in case she has trouble. And my mother said, there's no way she's taking my car. And he handed me,
It was a brand new car.
he handed me the keys to a brand new car and said, I trust you to be careful. And I didn't wrap that one around my telephone.
Well, John mentioned my mother's temper, and those of you who worked various things with her, I'm sure remember that she did have a rather explosive temper, to the point where it sometimes would just go off like a bottle rocket, kind of. And my father, being an even-tempered sort, would stand there and wait till it was all over, and then he would look at her and say, gee, Dorothy, I wish I had a temper like that.
And I have to say, I remember once when Joni was being a perfect little devil, and you said, Dorothy deserves her.
I think I did say that a time or two or three.
The only time, he only spanked me once in my entire life, and he was always even-tempered. No matter what I did, he always remained perfectly calm. My mother, but on Monday night she bowled, and it was on the late league, and then they always went out to dinner afterwards, or out somewhere to eat, and so she never got home until like 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was determined to stay up until my mother got home. So it was their job to put me to bed. And I would fight them all the time. And then what I would do is I would get in my crib that I was, this big bruiser at, 2.5, and I could climb out of my crib. And Tim, we had the same floor plan as you guys in your house, and I'd walk through the dark. I had the front bedroom, walk through the dark living room, the dark dining room. I'd wait for my mother to get home. I'd listen, and then I'd hear the back door. And then I'd tiptoe, through there, and then I'd push open the bathroom door and she'd be in there and I'd say, "Hi, Mommy." And then she'd put me to bed and then I'd hear her, "Augie, what's wrong with you? It's 1 o'clock in the morning." So one night I thought, why do I sit in a dark room in my crib? I'll just stay up. So I would just refuse to go to bed, and all of a sudden the music do comes on, and he just went ballistic. And he's like, "Do you know what that is? That's Johnny Carson music. You're 3 years old." And I tried to make it to my room because when I was 3, he was 45, so I figured he was kind of an old geezer. But he did, and my mother spanked me with frequency because she was stuck home with me all day, but he never did, and that was the one and only one that I got, and I remember it.
I remember an explosion when I was in high school. I was supposed to have some pond scum for a biology class, and I forgot. And it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I said, "But Dad, I have to have it." And so at 5:30 the next morning, before he left for work, he went out to Dave Brooks Slough, and he got me pond scum. Greater love hath no father than to do this for your child at that hour of a cold November morning. And I got an A in that class, and I aced it with Dad's pond scum.
Anyone else? If not,
I think it'd be a
oh,
good chance
yes.
for Larry to try to make some points with his father along here.
Well, Larry's at a bit of a disadvantage because he didn't know Father during these times here that we're talking about. My dad, as Ralph can attest to, was one of these neat-nick people who waxed and washed his car every Sunday, whether it needed it or not. They both were out in the driveway doing their cars, and they both had huge, big gardens, although Adeline was the gardener more than Ralph. He just, everything was neat and manicured. Well, his yard isn't nearly as neat and manicured now, and he tends to say, run the car through the car wash if you think it needs it. It's a whole different lifestyle than it used to be, and Larry's only seen this part of the lifestyle. It's hard for him to relate to the other part.
Anyone else? I just want to thank Ann and Joan for putting so much effort into this, and everyone else. We've learned a lot about you. So now you can't deny it. And we've learned a lot of history about Crete, too, because your family really has been a very much a strong part of the community of Crete and making it what it is today, a great place to live, and you've contributed so much. So we thank you very much, and we thank your daughters, and we hope everyone will stick around and enjoy some coffee, cookies, and come up and talk to Augie, and so we thank you for being here. Thanks very much.
And I thank my daughters and everybody else. Thank you kindly. This is a great honor for me on this. I really appreciate it. Thank you kindly.
Yeah, that's it.